The music stopped the moment Daniel raised his hand. 200 guests fell silent. Claire stood in the middle of the dance floor, her white dress catching the light, her hand still resting where his had been a second before. She was smiling, waiting for the song to begin, waiting for the moment every bride waits for. Instead, Daniel leaned close to her ear and said 4 words that would follow her for the rest of her life. "You need to leave." Claire laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, a strange kind of wedding humor meant only for her. But his face told a different story. His jaw was tight. His eyes did not blink. There was no warmth left in them, only something cold and closed, like a door shutting from the inside. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice shaking under the weight of 200 watching eyes. "Not here," he said. "Please just go." The band, unsure of what was happening, tried to start the music again, but Daniel lifted his hand a second time, and the room understood that something had gone terribly wrong. Whispers spread through the crowd like a fire jumping from table to table. Claire's mother rose halfway from her seat. Daniel's best man stepped forward, then stopped, unsure if he should interfere. Claire looked down at her dress, at the small pearls sewn into the fabric that her grandmother had once worn, and she felt the whole room grow heavy around her. She searched Daniel's face for some sign that this was a mistake, that he would take it back, that he would say he was sorry and pull her into his arms the way he always did when something upset him. But he only looked away. "I can't do this right now," he said. "I need you to go home. We will talk later." "We are getting married," Claire said, her voice cracking. "This is our wedding, Daniel. You cannot just send me away in the middle of it." "I already have," he said quietly. The words landed harder than anything he could have shouted. Claire felt her chest tighten, her breath catching somewhere between her throat and her heart. She looked around at the guests, at her parents, at his parents, at the wedding planner who was frozen near the entrance with a clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what the bride would do. She did not cry, not yet. Instead, Claire lifted the hem of her dress, turned without another word, and walked out of the reception hall. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor, each step louder than the last in the silence that followed her. She did not look back at Daniel. She did not look back at the guests. She walked past the table with the untouched wedding cake, past the photographer who lowered his camera in confusion, past the flowers that had been arranged so carefully that morning, and out through the double doors into the cool evening air. Only when she reached her car did the tears finally come, falling fast and hot down her cheeks, smudging the makeup that had taken 3 hours to apply. She sat behind the wheel in her wedding dress, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, unable to drive, unable to think, unable to understand what had just happened to the life she thought she was about to begin. Inside the hall, Daniel stood alone on the dance floor, the spot where his bride had been standing now empty. His mother rushed toward him, gripping his arm. "Daniel, what did you do?" she asked, her voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. He did not answer. He could not answer. His mind was still replaying the message he had received only 20 minutes earlier, a message that had arrived just before the first dance was supposed to begin, a message from a number he did not recognize. 3 lines of text that had changed everything. He had read it twice, standing near the gift table, his heart pounding so loudly he thought the guests nearby might hear it. He had looked up at Claire across the room, laughing with her bridesmaids, glowing in her white dress, and for a moment he could not reconcile the woman he saw with the words on his screen. But the message had included something he could not ignore. A photograph. Blurry, taken from a distance, but clear enough to recognize the woman in it. Clear enough, he believed, to recognize Claire. He had not confronted her properly. He had not asked her to explain. In the panic of the moment, with the band waiting and the guests watching and his own heart breaking in real time, he had made the only decision that felt possible to him then: get her away from him before the humiliation became public in a different way, before he had to stand there and dance with a woman he suddenly did not trust. Looking back now, in the empty space where she had stood, he wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. His best man, Ryan, approached him carefully, the way someone approaches a person standing too close to a ledge. Daniel, talk to me. What happened? What did that message say? Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone with a shaking hand. He unlocked it and passed it to Ryan without a word. Ryan's eyes scanned the screen, his eyebrows drawing together as he read the short message and looked at the photograph attached to it. This could be anything, Ryan said slowly. This could be nothing at all. Have you even asked her about it? I saw her face in that picture, Daniel said. I saw her hand on his shoulder. I saw the way she was standing next to him. You saw a picture, Ryan said. You didn't see the whole story. Daniel, you just sent your bride away on your wedding day because of a text from a stranger. Do you understand what you just did? Daniel did understand, more than Ryan realized. He understood that he had let fear make a decision that logic should have made. He understood that he had chosen to protect his pride rather than protect his marriage before it had even truly started. And somewhere beneath the anger and the hurt, he understood that he loved Claire more than he had ever loved anyone, which was exactly why the photograph had cut so deep. The guests began to leave in small, awkward groups, whispering to each other as they walked toward their cars. The band packed up their instruments without playing another note. The wedding planner quietly instructed the staff to begin clearing the tables, her face carefully blank, professional even in the middle of chaos. Daniel's father approached him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that would fix what had just happened. Daniel walked outside sometime later, long after Claire's car had already gone. The parking lot was empty except for a few stragglers saying their goodbyes in hushed voices. He stood beneath the string lights that had been hung for the reception, lights that were supposed to shine over a first dance, over laughter, over the beginning of a life shared between two people who loved each other. Instead, they shone over an empty dance floor and a groom standing alone in his tuxedo, holding a phone with a message he was already beginning to regret opening. He tried calling Claire. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again, same result. He sent a message, then another, then a third, each one shorter than the last as his composure slipped further away with each unanswered attempt. Claire, please call me back. I need to explain. I'm sorry. But sorry, he realized as he stood there in the empty parking lot with the string lights flickering above him, was not going to be enough. Not for what he had done in front of everyone they knew. Not for the way he had looked at her, the woman he loved, as though she were a stranger he could not trust. Claire, meanwhile, had finally found the strength to drive. She did not go home. She could not bear the thought of walking into the apartment they had shared for the past 2 years, an apartment now filled with wedding gifts still wrapped in ribbon, with a hanger on the closet door where her going-away outfit waited, with photographs of the two of them smiling from every wall. Instead, she drove to her sister's house on the other side of town, still wearing her wedding dress, still wearing shoes that pinched with every step, mascara streaked down both cheeks. Her sister, Emma, opened the door and gasped at the sight of her. Claire, what happened? Why are you here? Where is Daniel? Claire opened her mouth to explain, but no words came out. Instead, she simply stepped inside and collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands as the sobs she had been holding back in the car finally broke free. Emma sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, waiting patiently for her sister to find the words. It took nearly 10 minutes before Claire could speak clearly enough to tell the story. She described the way the music had stopped, the way Daniel's hand had gone up, the 4 words that had ended everything before it had truly begun. She described the silence of the room, the eyes of every guest watching her walk away, the long drive with tears blurring the road in front of her. He didn't even tell me why, Claire whispered. He just said he needed me to leave, on our wedding day, Emma. He sent me away like I had done something wrong, and he never even told me what. Emma's face hardened with anger on her sister's behalf. There has to be an explanation. Daniel loves you. Everyone could see how much he loves you. Something must have happened. I don't care what happened, Claire said, her voice suddenly firm despite the tears still on her cheeks. If he could not trust me enough to ask me a question before humiliating me in front of everyone we know, then maybe I never really knew him at all. That night, Claire finally took off her wedding dress and folded it carefully, placing it in a garment bag Emma found in the hall closet. She looked at it for a long moment before zipping the bag closed, as though she were closing a chapter of her life she had not been ready to finish. She turned off her phone without reading any of Daniel's messages, though she had seen the notifications appear one after another on the screen before she powered it down completely. She did not know, in that moment, that this would be the last time she saw her phone light up with his name for a very long while. She did not know that the next time Daniel would see her, it would not be as his bride at all, but as a woman standing beside someone else entirely, smiling in a way that would make his chest ache with a pain far worse than jealousy. She did not know any of what was coming. She only knew that the wedding was over, the guests were gone, the cake would never be cut, and the man she had loved since she was 22 years old had chosen to believe a stranger's message over the woman who had promised to spend her life beside him. Outside her sister's house, the night grew quiet, and somewhere across the city, Daniel sat alone in his car outside the venue long after the last light had been turned off inside, staring at the photograph on his phone, wondering if he had just destroyed the one good thing in his life over something that might not even be true. He would not find out how wrong he had been until it was almost too late. 3 weeks before the wedding, Daniel had met a man named Victor at a business dinner he almost did not attend. Victor was a supplier his company worked with, a pleasant enough man with an easy laugh and a habit of talking about people he barely knew as though he understood them completely. Somewhere between the appetizer and the main course, the conversation had drifted to weddings, and Daniel had mentioned Claire's name without thinking twice about it. Victor's expression had changed for just a moment, so briefly that Daniel almost missed it. Then Victor had smiled again and said, "Small world, I think I know a Claire Bennett too. Works in marketing, right? Dark hair, always laughing." Daniel had felt a strange discomfort settle in his stomach, though he could not explain why at the time. He told himself it was nothing. Claire was not an uncommon name, and marketing was not an unusual field. Thousands of women fit that description in a city this size. He finished his dinner, shook Victor's hand, and went home to Claire that night without mentioning the conversation at all. He should have told her. He would think that many times over the months that followed, replaying the moment again and again, wondering how differently everything might have unfolded if he had simply said, out loud over dinner, "Someone mentioned your name tonight, and it felt strange." But he had not said it. He had folded the discomfort away somewhere in the back of his mind, the way people do with feelings they do not want to examine too closely, and he had gone on planning the wedding as though nothing had shifted. 2 weeks later, Victor had reached out again, this time about a shipment delay, and the conversation had once more turned personal. Victor asked more questions about Claire this time, where she worked exactly, how long they had been together, when the wedding was. Daniel answered without much thought, the way people answer questions from acquaintances who seem harmlessly curious. It was only afterward, lying awake beside Claire, that he began to wonder why a man he barely knew would care so much about the details of his fiancée's life. He did not confront Victor. He did not mention any of it to Claire. Instead, the unease simply grew quieter and heavier inside him, a stone he carried without naming, until the night before the wedding when Victor sent him a message that was, on its surface, nothing more than a friendly congratulations. "Big day tomorrow. Hope everything goes exactly the way you want it to." Daniel had read it twice, searching for something sinister in the ordinary words, then told himself he was imagining things, that stress was making him paranoid, that tomorrow he would marry the woman he loved and none of this would matter anymore. Then came the message during the reception. 3 lines and a photograph, sent from a number Daniel did not recognize, arriving at the exact moment his world was supposed to become perfect. The photograph showed Claire standing close to a man Daniel did not know, her hand resting on his arm, both of them laughing at something outside a building Daniel could not place. The message beneath it read simply, You deserve to know who you're marrying. Ask her about last spring. Daniel had not stopped to consider who would send such a message, or why, or what the timing might mean. He had not stopped to notice that the photograph was blurry, that the angle was strange, that anyone with basic knowledge of photo editing could stage such a moment or misrepresent an innocent one. In the chaos of the day, with adrenaline and love and nerves already running high, the message had felt like a blade dropped directly into the center of his happiness, and he had reacted the only way panic allows a person to react, by trying to protect himself from a wound before it could fully land. It was only in the days that followed, sitting alone in the apartment that still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume, that Daniel began to ask the questions he should have asked before sending her away. Who had sent that message? Why they had chosen that exact moment? And why, of all the people who might have wanted to hurt him, the name that kept surfacing in his mind was Victor's? He opened his phone one evening, scrolled to the number that had sent the photograph, and stared at it for a long time before finally typing out a single question. Who is this? No response came that night, or the next, or the one after that. Daniel began to feel the full weight of what he had done settle over him like a stone sinking slowly to the bottom of a lake. He had built an entire decision, the most important decision of his life, on a message from a stranger who would not even answer a simple question. He thought of Claire's face in that final moment before she turned and walked away, the confusion and hurt written so plainly across it, and he understood that whatever happened next, he owed her the truth of what he had seen, and an apology far larger than any he had ever needed to give before. Claire stayed at Emma's house for 4 days before she found the courage to return to the apartment she had shared with Daniel. She went while she knew he would be at work, moving through the rooms quickly and quietly, taking only what she needed. She left her engagement ring on the kitchen counter, placed carefully in the center of a folded napkin, where she knew he would see it the moment he walked through the door. She did not leave a note. She felt that 4 words had been enough to end things on his side, and she did not owe him more than silence in return. Her phone had filled with messages over those 4 days, dozens of them, ranging from desperate apology to confused explanation to simple, repeated pleas for her to call him back. She read every single one, sitting on Emma's guest bed late at night when she could not sleep, but she answered none of them. Something inside her had closed like a door locking itself from the inside, and she was not yet ready to see what waited on the other side of that door, whether it was forgiveness or something far more final. Her mother called on the second day, her voice tight with worry and barely restrained anger. "Claire, sweetheart, tell me what happened. Everyone is asking questions. The whole reception saw him send you away like that. Do you know why?" "No," Claire admitted quietly. "He never told me why. He just said he needed me to go, and then he stopped answering when I tried to ask." "That is not how a marriage begins," her mother said. "That is not how anyone should be treated, especially not on their wedding day. You deserve an explanation, Claire, even if the answer is one you do not want to hear." Claire knew her mother was right, but knowing something and being ready to face it were 2 very different things. Each time she considered calling Daniel, she remembered the coldness in his eyes as he told her to leave, the way he had looked at her as though she were a stranger who had somehow deceived him, and the memory made her stomach twist with a mixture of grief and anger that she did not yet know how to untangle. She returned to work the following Monday, though every part of her wanted to stay hidden away in Emma's guest room indefinitely. Her coworkers had heard, of course, because news like this traveled fast in a city where several of her colleagues had attended the wedding. They offered sympathetic glances and careful silence, unsure how to address what had happened, unsure whether Claire wanted to talk about it at all. She did not. She buried herself in projects, working longer hours than necessary, staying at her desk until the office emptied out around her, because work was the only thing that kept her mind from circling back to that dance floor, to that music stopping, to Daniel's hand rising into the air like a signal she still did not understand. It was during one of those long evenings, nearly 3 weeks after the wedding that never finished, that Claire finally learned part of the truth, though not from Daniel himself. She had gone to pick up a few of her things from a storage unit she and Daniel had rented together before the wedding, filled with furniture and boxes meant for the home they would eventually buy. While she was there, she ran into Ryan, Daniel's best man, who had come to drop off some leftover decorations from the reception that no one had known what to do with. The two of them stood awkwardly among stacked boxes for a long moment before Ryan finally spoke. "Claire, I have to say something, and I probably shouldn't, but I can't keep watching you walk around not knowing what actually happened." Claire's heart began to pound. "What are you talking about?" Ryan hesitated, glancing around as though Daniel might somehow appear and stop him from speaking. "Someone sent Daniel a message right before the first dance, a photograph of you with some man, and a message telling him to ask you about last spring." He panicked. "He didn't ask you anything, he just reacted, and I think he has regretted it every single day since." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "A photograph of me with a man? What man? I don't understand." "I don't know the details," Ryan admitted. "I only saw the message for a few seconds before everything fell apart, but Daniel has been trying to figure out who sent it. He thinks it might be someone from work, a supplier named Victor, but he hasn't been able to prove anything yet." Claire's mind raced backward through the months before the wedding, searching for any memory that might explain what Ryan was describing. And then, slowly, a memory surfaced, one she had not thought about in months. Last spring, she had attended a work conference downtown, and during a break between sessions, she had run into an old college friend outside the building, a man named Victor whom she had not seen in years. They had spoken for perhaps 10 minutes, catching up on old times, and at one point he had rested a hand briefly on her arm while telling a funny story, the kind of casual gesture old friends make without thinking. She remembered laughing at something he said. She remembered nothing more significant than that. "Victor," Claire repeated slowly. "I know of Victor. We went to college together. I ran into him at a conference last spring, that's all. Nothing happened, Ryan, nothing at all." "I believe you," Ryan said, "but Daniel doesn't know any of that because he never asked. He just saw a photograph and made a decision, and now he's too ashamed to face you and admit how badly he handled it." Claire stood among the boxes in the dim storage unit, feeling something shift inside her chest, an emotion she could not immediately name. It was not quite relief, because relief would have meant the pain of that night was somehow undone, and it was not. But it was something close to clarity, a piece of the puzzle finally falling into place, even if the picture it formed only made her feel more betrayed than before. Daniel had not seen her do anything wrong. He had seen a blurry photograph and a message from a stranger, and he had chosen to believe the worst about her without giving her even a single chance to explain. "He should have asked me," Claire said quietly, more to herself than to Ryan. "Whatever he thought he saw, whatever he was told, he should have looked me in the eyes and asked me before he sent me away in front of everyone we know." "I know," Ryan said. "I told him the same thing that night. I don't think there's any excuse for how he handled it. But I also don't think he's a bad person, Claire. I think he's a person who was scared, and fear makes people do things they would never do with a clear head." Claire nodded slowly, though she did not fully agree. Fear, she thought, was not an excuse for cruelty, even accidental cruelty. Fear did not explain why he had not simply pulled her aside and asked a question before making a decision that would humiliate her in front of 200 witnesses. She thanked Ryan for telling her the truth, gathered the box she had come for, and drove back to Emma's house with her mind spinning in 100 directions at once. That night she finally opened her phone and read through every message Daniel had sent over the past 3 weeks, really read them this time, not skimming past them in a haze of hurt. Many of them were simple apologies, repeated so often they began to blur together. But buried among them was one longer message, sent nearly 2 weeks earlier, that Claire had somehow missed or perhaps had simply not been ready to see. "Claire, I know I don't deserve to be heard right now, and I know nothing I say will undo what I did. I received a message before our first dance, a photograph of you with a man I didn't recognize, and words that made me doubt everything in an instant. I should have asked you. I should have trusted you enough to ask a simple question before making the worst decision of my life. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am only asking you to know that I am trying to find out who sent it and why, because I think someone wanted to hurt us and I let them succeed. I am so sorry. I will always be sorry. Claire read the message 3 times, her chest tight with a confusing mixture of anger, sorrow, and something that felt uncomfortably close to sympathy. Part of her wanted to call him immediately, to demand every detail, to finally have the conversation that should have happened before she was ever asked to leave her own wedding. But a larger part of her, the part still raw from standing alone in the parking lot in her wedding dress, was not ready. Trust, she realized, was not something that could be rebuilt with a single message, no matter how sincere it sounded. It would take more than words to convince her that Daniel would not doubt her again the next time a stranger tried to plant a seed of suspicion between them. She set the phone down on the nightstand and turned off the light, staring up at the ceiling in the darkness of her sister's guest room, wondering how a single message from someone she barely knew had managed to unravel a relationship she had believed was strong enough to survive anything. She did not yet know that the truth was even more complicated than either of them realized, or that the person behind the message had motives that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. The apartment felt different without Claire in it, though nothing had physically changed except for the small, hollow space on the kitchen counter where her ring used to sit before Daniel finally moved it to a drawer he could not bring himself to open again. Boxes of unopened wedding gifts still lined the hallway, waiting for a couple that no longer existed to unwrap them together. A blender still sat in its box from Claire's aunt. A set of towels monogrammed with both their initials remained sealed in plastic. Daniel walked past them every morning on his way to work and every evening on his way back, and each time the sight of them felt like a small, fresh wound reopening. He had thrown himself into finding the source of that message, partly out of a genuine need to understand what had happened, and partly because it gave him something to focus on besides the enormous silence Claire had left behind. He began by asking Victor directly, catching him after a routine business call and steering the conversation toward the wedding. "How did it go?" Victor had asked, his tone carefully neutral in a way that struck Daniel as strange the moment he heard it. "It didn't," Daniel said flatly, watching Victor's face for any flicker of reaction. "I sent Claire away before we even had our first dance. Someone sent me a photograph of her with another man right before the ceremony ended. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Victor's expression shifted for only a fraction of a second, so briefly that a less attentive observer might have missed it entirely, but Daniel caught it, and something cold settled in his stomach. "Why would I know anything about that?" Victor asked, his laugh sounding forced. "I barely know Claire." "That's strange," Daniel said, "because you told me you did. At dinner a few weeks before the wedding, you said you knew a Claire Bennett, dark hair, works in marketing. You asked me quite a lot of questions about her that night, actually." Victor's smile faltered completely this time. "I don't remember saying that." "I do," Daniel said. "I remember every word." Victor excused himself from the conversation shortly after that, citing another call he needed to take, and Daniel was left standing in his office with his heart pounding, certain now that Victor knew far more than he was willing to admit. He spent the rest of that day digging through old emails and messages, searching for any connection between Victor and the unknown number that had sent the photograph. It took him nearly a week of careful searching, cross-referencing phone records from a shared business account, before he finally found what he was looking for. The number that had texted him during the reception matched a secondary line registered under a company Victor occasionally used for side projects, a detail buried deep enough that Daniel almost missed it entirely. He confronted Victor again the following week, this time with the evidence laid out plainly between them. Victor, cornered and unable to deny it any longer, finally admitted the truth, though it took considerable pressure before the full story emerged. Years earlier, long before Daniel had ever met Claire, Victor had briefly dated a close friend of hers, a relationship that had ended badly, with Victor blaming Claire for encouraging her friend to leave him. He had carried that resentment quietly for years, and when he discovered, through casual conversation with Daniel, that Claire was the same woman about to be married, old bitterness had resurfaced in a way he had not expected. The photograph he sent had been real, taken from Claire's own social media from an old college reunion post, cropped and reframed to suggest something far more intimate than the innocent conversation it had actually captured. The timing had been deliberate, chosen specifically to cause maximum damage during a moment when Daniel would have no time to think clearly or ask questions before reacting. Daniel felt sick as the pieces came together, a nauseating mixture of anger toward Victor and a far heavier, more consuming shame directed entirely at himself. Victor's cruelty explained the message, but it did not excuse Daniel's response to it. He was the one who had chosen not to ask Claire a single question. He was the one who had let panic override years of trust built between them. Victor had planted a seed, but Daniel was the one who had let it grow into something that destroyed his own wedding. He reported what he had learned to Ryan first, needing someone to help him process the weight of it before he could figure out what to do next. "You have to tell Claire," Ryan said immediately. "All of it, every detail. She deserves to know exactly what happened and why." "I know," Daniel said, "but she hasn't answered any of my calls in weeks. I don't even know if she wants to hear from me at all." "Then you find another way," Ryan said. "You don't get to hide behind her silence just because facing her is hard. You made this mess. Clean it up, even if it means showing up somewhere you're not welcome." Daniel considered showing up at her workplace, or at her sister's house where he knew she had been staying, but something held him back each time he came close to doing it. Perhaps it was fear of the anger he knew he deserved to receive. Perhaps it was a quieter, more painful fear that even a full explanation, even complete evidence of his own foolishness, would not be enough to undo the damage he had caused. He had, after all, chosen to believe a manipulated photograph over the years of love and trust Claire had given him. No apology could fully erase the message that decision had sent her, standing alone on that dance floor in front of everyone they knew. Instead, Daniel wrote everything down, every detail of what Victor had admitted, every piece of evidence he had gathered, and he sent it to Claire in a single, long message, along with a simple request. "I don't expect you to respond. I only wanted you to have the truth, whenever you're ready for it." He did not receive a response that night, or the next, or for many nights after that. He told himself he had done what he could, that the rest was no longer his to control, but the waiting felt like its own kind of punishment, stretching out across weeks that blurred together into a gray, uncertain fog. He continued going to work, continued coming home to an apartment still filled with unopened boxes, continued walking past the drawer where Claire's ring sat waiting for a decision neither of them seemed ready to make. Some evenings he sat on the balcony where they used to share coffee together on weekend mornings, looking out over the city lights, wondering where she was in that same skyline, wondering if she ever thought of him the way he thought of her, in every quiet, unguarded moment of the day. He did not know, during those long weeks of silence, that Claire had read his message the very night he sent it, sitting alone in Emma's guest room with her phone screen illuminating her face in the darkness. He did not know that she had cried after reading it, not entirely from sorrow this time, but from a complicated grief that included both relief at finally understanding the truth and a fresh wave of hurt at how easily he had believed the lie in the first place. He did not know that Claire had begun, slowly and cautiously, to consider what she wanted her life to look like moving forward, with or without him in it. And he certainly did not know that somewhere in the weeks ahead, before any reconciliation could take shape between them, Claire's path would cross with someone new, someone who would offer her the kind of steady, uncomplicated attention she desperately needed after everything she had been through, and that this new presence in her life would soon become the very thing that broke Daniel's heart all over again. Claire read Daniel's long message about Victor more times than she could count over the following days, each reading stirring up a different layer of emotion, until she could no longer separate one feeling from another. Relief that the truth had finally surfaced, anger at Victor for his cruelty, a bitterness so specific and calculated that it frightened her to think someone had carried resentment toward her for so many years without her ever knowing. And beneath both of those feelings, a deeper, quieter sadness directed at Daniel himself, because the truth did not change the fact that he had chosen suspicion over trust in the most important moment of their relationship. She did not respond to his message right away. Instead, she carried the knowledge quietly for nearly 2 weeks, turning it over in her mind during long walks after work, during sleepless nights in Emma's guest room, during quiet moments at her desk when her thoughts drifted away from whatever project sat in front of her. She wanted, more than anything, to understand her own feelings before she tried to explain them to Daniel, because she suspected that whatever she said to him next would shape the rest of her life, one way or another. It was during this period of quiet reflection that Claire met Nathan. He worked at the coffee shop near her office, though not as a barista, but as the new manager brought in to help expand the small business into a second location. Claire had been going there every morning for over a year, long enough that the previous staff had known her order by heart, and when Nathan took over the morning shifts during the transition, he made a point of learning it himself within the first week. "Oat milk latte, extra shot, no sugar," he said one morning, sliding the cup across the counter before she had even finished ordering. "Rough week." Claire blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" "You've been coming in with your shoulders up around your ears for about 10 days now," he said with a small, easy smile. "I figured either work is hard or something else is going on. Not my business either way, but the coffee's on me today." It was a small kindness, the sort of thing that might have meant nothing on an ordinary week, but for Claire, still raw from months of silence and suspicion and heartbreak, it felt like a strange, unexpected comfort. Nathan did not know her history. He did not know about the wedding that had ended before it began, about the message and the photograph and the forewords that had sent her walking out of her own reception in tears. To him, she was simply the woman who came in every morning looking a little more tired than she should, and his kindness came without any weight of expectation attached to it. Over the following weeks, their brief morning exchanges grew into something more familiar, though nothing Claire would have called romantic, not at first. Nathan asked about her day. She asked about the new shop location he was helping to open. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, a habit she found both endearing and, after everything with Daniel, faintly unsettling in how easily she noticed it. She found herself looking forward to those morning conversations in a way she had not expected, a small bright point in days that otherwise still felt heavy with unresolved grief. It was Emma who first pointed out what was happening. "You talk about that coffee shop guy more than you've talked about anything in months," Emma said one evening as they sat together in the kitchen. "Do you like him?" "It's not like that," Claire said quickly. "He's just kind, that's all. I haven't exactly had a lot of kindness lately." "Maybe that's exactly what you need right now," Emma said gently. "Someone kind, with no complicated history attached to it." Claire considered this for a long time after Emma went to bed that night, sitting alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea slowly going cold in front of her. She thought about Daniel's message, still unanswered, still sitting in her phone like an open wound waiting to be addressed. She thought about the years they had spent together before the wedding, the genuine love she still believed had existed between them, and the way that love had not been enough to stop him from doubting her the moment doubt was offered to him. And she thought about Nathan, easy and uncomplicated, offering warmth without asking anything difficult of her in return. She was not ready, she decided, to fully close the door on Daniel. But she also was not ready to walk back through it. Not yet, not while the memory of standing alone on that dance floor still felt so fresh whenever she closed her eyes. She needed time, and in the meantime, she allowed herself the small, uncomplicated pleasure of Nathan's company, without labeling it as anything more than that. A month passed this way, Claire's mornings anchored by coffee and easy conversation, her evenings still occasionally spent staring at Daniel's unanswered message, unsure how or when she would finally respond. She had by this point moved out of Emma's guest room and into a small apartment of her own, a space entirely hers, filled with furniture she had chosen herself, free of any memory tied to Daniel or the life they had once planned together. The independence felt strange at first, then slowly, steadily, it began to feel like healing. Nathan asked her to dinner during the 6th week of their morning conversations, phrasing it carefully, almost cautiously, as though he sensed there was more to her story than she had shared. "No pressure," he said. "Just dinner. I like talking to you, and I'd like to do it somewhere that isn't across a coffee counter for once." Claire hesitated only briefly before agreeing. It was, she told herself, just dinner. A chance to know someone a little better, nothing more significant than that. She did not mention Daniel that night, not directly, though Nathan seemed to sense the outline of something painful in her past whenever certain topics came close to the surface, and he was careful never to push. Their dinners became a regular occurrence over the following weeks, always easy, always comfortable, never rushed. Nathan did not ask for explanations Claire was not ready to give. He simply showed up, consistently and gently, offering the kind of steady presence that felt like sunlight after a long stretch of storms. Claire found herself smiling more, laughing more freely, feeling lighter in ways she had not expected to feel again so soon after everything that happened with Daniel. She still had not responded to his message. Part of her wondered, during quiet moments alone, whether she owed him anything more than she had already given through her silence. He had made his choice on their wedding day, publicly and without asking her a single question, and the consequences of that choice belonged to him just as much as her healing belonged to her. But another part of her, the part that still remembered years of genuine love and partnership before Victor's cruelty had poisoned everything, felt a quiet ache whenever she thought of Daniel sitting alone, waiting for a response that might never come. She finally typed a reply nearly 2 months after his original message, though she deleted it 3 times before finally sending something short and measured. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I need more time before I know what I want to do with it." Daniel's response came within minutes, careful and restrained, clearly written by someone who understood he had already used up whatever patience he might have once been owed. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready if you ever are." Claire set her phone down that night feeling a strange mixture of closure and uncertainty, as though she had opened a door only slightly, unsure whether she wanted to walk through it or close it again for good. She thought of Nathan, waiting for her at dinner the following evening, easy and uncomplicated and entirely unaware of the door she had just cracked open in another part of her life. She thought of Daniel, alone in the apartment they once shared, still holding on to a hope she had not yet decided whether to honor or release. She did not know, in that quiet moment, that fate was about to force her hand in a way neither patience nor careful deliberation could have prepared her for, when Daniel would see her for the first time in 3 months, not as the bride he had sent away, but as a woman standing beside someone else entirely, radiant in a way that would break his heart before he ever had the chance to fully repair it. 3 months to the day after the wedding that never finished, Daniel found himself standing outside a small event hall downtown, waiting for Ryan, who had insisted on dragging him out to a mutual friend's engagement party despite Daniel's repeated protests that he was not ready for celebrations of any kind. "You can't hide in that apartment forever," Ryan had told him over the phone earlier that week. "It's been 3 months, Daniel. Come out, see some people, remember what it feels like to breathe air that isn't trapped in that place full of unopened wedding gifts." Daniel had agreed reluctantly, mostly because he suspected Ryan would show up at his door and physically drag him out if he refused. He arrived at the party wearing a simple dark suit, his expression carefully composed into something resembling normalcy, though inside he still carried the same quiet ache that had followed him through every day of the past 3 months. He had heard nothing further from Claire since her brief message weeks earlier, and though he told himself he had accepted her silence, some smaller, more hopeful part of him still checked his phone every morning before he had even fully opened his eyes. The party was lively, filled with familiar faces from a world that felt strangely distant now. Friends who had attended his own wedding, who had watched the disaster unfold on the dance floor months earlier and had been careful, out of kindness, never to bring it up directly in the months since. Daniel accepted a drink from a passing waiter, exchanged polite conversation with people he had not seen since the reception, and tried, with limited success, to convince himself he was having a reasonably pleasant evening. Then he saw her. Claire stood near the far side of the room, dressed in a deep green gown that caught the light every time she moved, her hair styled differently than he remembered, her laugh carrying across the room in a way that struck him somewhere deep in his chest before his mind had even fully processed who he was looking at. She looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy, in a way Daniel had not seen since long before the wedding, since before the stress of planning and the slow creeping unease of Victor's manipulation had begun to settle over their relationship like a shadow neither of them fully understood was there. And beside her stood a man Daniel did not recognize, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, leaning close to say something that made her laugh again, brighter this time, her whole face lighting up with an ease that felt like a physical blow to Daniel's chest. He stood frozen near the edge of the room, his drink forgotten in his hand, unable to look away and equally unable to force himself forward. Ryan noticed the direction of his gaze and followed it, his own expression shifting quickly from confusion to concern as he registered what Daniel was seeing. "Daniel," Ryan said quietly, "do you want to leave?" "Who is he?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ryan hesitated. "I don't know, I've never seen him before tonight." Daniel watched as the man leaned down and said something else, watched as Claire's hand came up to rest briefly against his arm. A gesture so natural and comfortable it told Daniel everything he needed to know about how much time had passed since these two had grown close to one another. He thought of the ring he had once placed on her finger, the vows they had exchanged just moments before everything fell apart, and he felt a grief so sudden and overwhelming that he had to set his drink down on a nearby table simply to steady his hands. For 3 months he had told himself he still had time. He had told himself Claire simply needed space, that her silence was not a closed door but a slow one, still swinging on its hinges, still capable of opening again if he was patient enough, honest enough, sorry enough for long enough. Seeing her now, laughing beside another man with an ease that suggested real affection rather than casual acquaintance, he understood with sudden, painful clarity that the door he had been waiting for might already be closing, if it had not closed already. He almost turned to leave, wanting nothing more than to disappear from the party before Claire noticed him standing there. But it was too late. Her eyes drifted across the room in the natural way eyes do at a crowded party, scanning faces without particular purpose, and then they landed on him, and everything in her expression shifted at once. Surprise first, quick and unmistakable. Then something more complicated, a flicker of emotions moving too fast across her face for Daniel to fully read from across the room. She said something quietly to the man beside her, who nodded and stepped back slightly, giving her space, and then Claire began walking toward Daniel with slow, deliberate steps, her green gown moving gracefully with each stride. "Daniel," she said when she reached him, her voice steady in a way that surprised him, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Ryan insisted," Daniel said, his own voice sounding rougher than he intended. "I didn't know you would be here either." An awkward silence settled between them, filled with 3 months of unspoken words neither of them seemed ready to voice in the middle of a crowded party. Daniel's eyes drifted, almost against his will, toward the man who had stepped back but remained watching from a short distance away, clearly curious but respectful enough not to interrupt. "Is he?" Daniel started, then stopped himself, unsure how to finish the question, unsure whether he had any right to ask it at all. "His name is Nathan," Claire said simply. "We met a few months ago." The words landed heavier than Daniel expected, though he had no right to feel surprised. He had, after all, sent her away himself, and 3 months was more than enough time for a person to begin building a new life, especially a person as kind and deserving of happiness as Claire had always been. Still, hearing the confirmation directly from her lips felt like watching a door close firmly, deliberately, right in front of him. I got your message, Claire continued, her voice softening slightly. The one about Victor, about everything he did. I believe you, Daniel, I believe every word of it. Then why, Daniel began, unable to keep the raw hurt from his voice. Because believing you and forgiving what happened are two different things, Claire said gently. You didn't ask me a single question before you sent me away in front of everyone we knew. Victor may have lit the match, but you were the one who let the fire burn. I needed time to heal from that, Daniel, whether or not the reason behind it turned out to be a lie. Daniel nodded slowly, unable to argue with the truth of what she was saying, though every word felt like a fresh wound reopening in his chest. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to explain yourself to me. I'm happy you found someone who makes you laugh like that. The words cost him more than Claire could have known, each syllable forced out through a throat tight with grief he was determined not to show. Claire studied his face for a long moment, searching for something Daniel could not quite identify, before she finally spoke again. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I don't hate you, Daniel. I was angry for a long time, and some part of that anger is probably still there. But I don't hate you. I just needed to build something for myself again, something that didn't start with someone doubting me before they ever asked me a question. She excused herself shortly after that, returning to Nathan's side across the room, and Daniel watched her go with a feeling of loss so profound it settled into his bones like a permanent weight. Ryan appeared at his shoulder a moment later, quietly steering him toward the exit without comment, understanding without being told that Daniel had reached the limit of what he could endure for one evening. They walked out into the cool night air together, and Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the sky, trying to process everything he had just seen and heard. 3 months ago, he had sent his bride away before their first dance, certain in that terrible moment that he was protecting himself from a betrayal that had never actually happened. Now he stood outside a party watching that same woman laugh beside someone new, a version of Claire more radiant and at peace than he had seen her in the final anxious weeks before their wedding. And he understood, with a clarity that felt almost unbearable, exactly what his single moment of doubt had cost him. What are you going to do? Ryan asked quietly as they walked toward the car. Daniel did not answer right away. He thought of Claire's words, the careful distinction she had drawn between believing him and forgiving him, and he wondered whether there was any path forward from where he now stood, or whether the door he had once hoped might still be open had, in fact, closed for good the moment he chose suspicion over trust on the happiest day either of them had ever planned. I don't know, he finally admitted. But I don't think it's fair to ask her to choose between the mistake I made and the life she's building without me in it. He got into the car in silence, the image of Claire's laughter still burning behind his eyes, and for the first time since the wedding, he began to seriously consider what it would mean to let her go completely, even as every instinct in his heart resisted the idea with everything it had left. Claire could not stop thinking about the look on Daniel's face for days after the engagement party, a mixture of grief and quiet acceptance that had settled somewhere deep inside her chest, and refused to leave no matter how many times she reminded herself that she owed him nothing further. Nathan noticed the change in her mood almost immediately, though he was careful not to push for explanations she was not ready to offer. You've been quiet since the party, he said one evening, as they sat together on the small balcony of her apartment, the city lights spreading out beneath them. Is everything all right? I saw someone from my past there, Claire admitted, someone I wasn't expecting to run into. Nathan studied her carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than jealous, which was one of the many things Claire had come to appreciate about him over the past few months. The wedding you don't talk about, he said gently. That was him, wasn't it? Claire nodded slowly, surprised by how easily he had put the pieces together despite her careful avoidance of the topic for so long. I've never really told you what happened, she said. I think it's time I did. She told him everything that night, sitting together on the balcony as the evening cooled around them. She described the wedding, the music stopping, Daniel's hand rising into the air, the forewords that had ended everything before it truly began. She described the humiliation of walking out through the reception hall in front of 200 guests, the confusion of the following weeks, and finally the truth she had learned about Victor's manipulation, the photograph he had staged, the years of quiet resentment that had led him to try to destroy something he had no real claim to. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as the story unfolded, though he remained careful not to pass judgment before she had finished. "That's an enormous thing to carry," he said finally, once she had finished speaking. "I understand now why you've been guarded. I would be too after something like that." "I believed him eventually," Claire said, "about Victor, about the truth behind it all. But believing the explanation didn't erase what happened. He chose not to trust me in the moment that mattered most, and I don't know if that's something I can simply move past, even now." Nathan reached over and took her hand gently. "You don't owe him a resolution just because he's finally sorry, but you also don't have to carry this weight forever if part of you still needs to close that chapter properly. Whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm not going anywhere because of it." His words settled something in Claire that had been unsettled since the moment she saw Daniel standing across the party, his eyes full of a grief she recognized, because she had carried the same grief herself for months. She realized, sitting there with Nathan's steady hand in hers, that she needed one final conversation with Daniel, not to reopen anything between them, but to finally close the door properly, on her own terms, with clarity rather than silence. She reached out to him 2 days later, sending a brief message asking if he would be willing to meet, just once, to talk everything through properly. Daniel responded within minutes, agreeing to meet her at a quiet cafe neither of them had ever been to together, neutral ground free of memories that might complicate an already difficult conversation. They sat across from each other 3 days later, both looking slightly nervous in a way that felt strange after years of easy familiarity between them. Daniel spoke first, unable to bear the weight of silence any longer. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I needed to," Claire said. "For myself more than for you, honestly. I've been carrying this for months, and I think I finally understand what I need to say." Daniel nodded, bracing himself for whatever was coming, his hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup he had not yet touched. "I forgive you," Claire said quietly, and Daniel's eyes widened in surprise at hearing the words spoken so plainly. "Not because what you did was acceptable, because it wasn't. You should have asked me a question before you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. But I understand now that you were manipulated by someone who spent years nursing a grudge he had no right to carry, and I believe that in a calmer moment, you never would have made the choice you made that day." "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I am more grateful for it than I know how to express." "I'm not saying this so we can go back to how things were," Claire continued gently. "I've built something new for myself, Daniel. Nathan has been steady and kind in ways I desperately needed after everything that happened, and I care about him. I'm not choosing you. I'm choosing peace, for both of us, so we can each move forward without carrying this anger any longer." Daniel absorbed her words slowly, feeling a complicated mixture of relief and renewed grief settle over him at once. Part of him had held onto a quiet hope, buried beneath layers of guilt, that this conversation might somehow lead back toward reconciliation. Hearing Claire speak so clearly about the life she was building with someone else extinguished that hope completely, though her forgiveness offered something valuable in its place. A chance to finally release the guilt that had followed him through every day of the past 3 months. "I'm happy for you," Daniel said, and this time the words came more easily than they had at the party weeks earlier, spoken with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "Truly, you deserve someone who will never make you doubt where you stand with them, not even for a single moment. And you deserve to forgive yourself eventually," Claire said. "Victor caused real damage that day, more than either of us fully understood at the time. Don't let him take any more from you than he already has." They talked for nearly an hour after that, not about rebuilding what had been lost, but about closing it properly, exchanging memories of good times they had shared without the bitterness that had colored every interaction between them for the past 3 months. When they finally rose to leave, Claire reached across the table and squeezed Daniel's hand briefly, a gesture of genuine care rather than romantic longing. "I hope you find happiness too, Daniel," she said. "You deserve the chance to build something as real as what I've found once you're ready for it." Daniel watched her walk out of the cafe, the bell above the door ringing softly behind her, and for the first time since the wedding, he felt something close to peace settle over the grief he had carried for so long. It was not the ending he had hoped for when he first sat down across from her, but it was, he realized, exactly the ending he needed. A chance to release the guilt that had weighed on him for months and finally begin imagining a future that did not depend on a door that had already closed. He walked home that evening with a strange lightness in his steps, understanding at last that some mistakes could not be undone, but they could be forgiven, and that forgiveness, even without reconciliation, was its own kind of gift he had not expected to receive. 6 months passed after that quiet conversation in the cafe, and life, in its patient and unpredictable way, continued moving forward for both Claire and Daniel, though along very different paths. Claire's relationship with Nathan deepened steadily over that time, built on the same foundation of honesty and patience that had drawn her to him in the first place. He never once pressured her to move faster than she was ready for, never once made her feel as though her past with Daniel was a burden he resented carrying alongside her. When he eventually proposed, on a quiet evening on the same balcony where she had first told him the full truth of what happened at her first wedding, Claire said yes without a single moment of hesitation, because for the first time in a very long while, she felt completely certain of the life she was choosing. Their wedding, when it finally came, was small and intimate, nothing like the large, elaborate event she had once planned with Daniel. She wore a simpler dress this time, surrounded by only the people closest to her, and when the moment for their first dance arrived, there was no interruption, no stopped music, no hand rising into the air to send her away. There was only Nathan's steady arms around her, his quiet promise that he would never let doubt stand between them without first asking the questions that mattered, and the deep, settled joy of a woman who had finally found the peace she deserved. Daniel did not attend the wedding, though Claire had extended a kind, careful invitation months earlier, understanding that his presence there might be more painful than either of them needed it to be. He sent a simple card instead, wishing her genuine happiness, and Claire kept it in a drawer for years afterward, a quiet reminder of how much healing had taken place between two people who once believed their story would end in heartbreak. Daniel's own path forward took longer to find its footing. In the months following his conversation with Claire, he threw himself into understanding the parts of himself that had allowed panic and doubt to override years of trust in a single, devastating moment. He began speaking regularly with a counselor, working through the fear and insecurity that Victor's manipulation had so easily exploited, learning slowly how to recognize the difference between genuine caution and the kind of reactive suspicion that had cost him everything he once held most dear. Victor, for his part, faced consequences of his own once the truth of his manipulation became known more broadly within their shared professional circles. His reputation suffered considerably as word spread of what he had done, and the supplier relationship between his company and Daniel's was quietly severed, a small measure of justice that offered Daniel little comfort, but at least confirmed that actions carried consequences, even years after the fact. It was nearly a year after the wedding that never finished before Daniel felt ready to open himself to the possibility of new love again. He met a woman named Sophie through a mutual friend, someone with a quiet steadiness and a gentle sense of humor that reminded him, in the best possible way, that trust could still be rebuilt, even after it had been broken so badly once before. Their relationship grew slowly, deliberately, with Daniel making a conscious effort at every step to communicate openly rather than allowing fear or doubt to fester unspoken beneath the surface, exactly the mistake he had promised himself he would never make again. 2 years after that terrible wedding day, Daniel and Sophie stood together at their own small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family, including Ryan, who stood beside Daniel once again as his best man, though this time with visible relief, rather than the anxious tension that had marked the earlier occasion. When the music began for their first dance, Daniel held Sophie close and felt none of the panic or doubt that had once destroyed everything with Claire. He had learned, through loss and painful reflection, exactly what trust required, and he was determined never again to let a single unexamined fear override the love standing directly in front of him. Years later, Claire and Daniel would occasionally cross paths at mutual friends' gatherings, always polite, always genuinely warm toward one another, their history acknowledged openly rather than avoided uncomfortably. Both had built full, happy lives out of the wreckage of that single terrible day, proof that even the most painful beginnings did not have to determine how a story ultimately ended. Claire often thought back to that moment on the dance floor, the music stopping, Daniel's hand rising into the air, the 4 words that had once felt like the end of everything she believed her life would be. In time, she came to understand that moment differently, not as a tragedy that defined her, but as a painful beginning that had ultimately led her toward a life built on steadier, more honest foundations than she might have found otherwise. The heartbreak had been real, and so had the anger, but so too had been the growth that followed, the independence she discovered in herself, and the deep, settled happiness she eventually found with someone who never once made her doubt where she stood in his heart. Daniel, for his part, carried the lessons of that day with him for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered by fear left unexamined, and how much careful, deliberate honesty it took to rebuild something worth keeping. He never forgot the sight of Claire walking out of their reception hall in her wedding dress, nor the sight of her 3 months later, radiant and laughing beside someone new, each memory a quiet teacher shaping the man he slowly became in the years that followed. Both of them, in their own separate ways, learned the same difficult truth from that single devastating day. That love, however deep, could not survive without trust standing firmly beside it, and that the moments when trust is tested most severely are often the very moments that reveal, with painful clarity, exactly what a person is truly made of. In the end, neither Claire nor Daniel would have chosen to relive that terrible wedding day if given the choice. But both of them, standing years later in the happiness they had each separately rebuilt, understood that sometimes the most painful endings quietly become the beginning of something far more honest and lasting than either of them could have imagined standing on that dance floor, in the silence that followed 4 words neither of them would ever fully forget.